Hello YouTube, back with another computer video. Today we're going to be turning this sad old little Dell into a kick-ass gaming rig. Well, that's the plan anyway. These videos aren't scripted. Well, what do we have now? Right now we have a 350 watt PSU made by a decent manufacturer. I believe they make server power supplies too. Little tiny dinky cooler. We're not going to be overclocking this. We're just going to be replacing the CPU straight up. Little hard drive, 8GB DDR3 RAM in dual channel. And well, as you can see, the system is pretty simple compared to the Core 2 quad system. But it will be a lot faster, I'll promise you that. If you take a look up on the screen here and turn off the freaking flash, we have a Core i3 540. That is a first generation Core i series processor, folks. There's no turbo boost on this one. I don't believe i3s have turbo boost in the first place, except for maybe 10th gen or 11th gen. That might be different, but no turbo boost. It has a maximum of 3.07 gigahertz, and it has Intel enhanced speed steps, so that's what you're seeing right here. Unlike the Core 2 series CPUs, Task Manager does report this correctly, as you can see right here. This is 1 gigahertz, 1 gigahertz. This is around 1 gigahertz. It's about the same. It's correct. We're running a 32 nanometer CPU, so this would have came out maybe like a year or a couple years right after the Core 2 quads. The 45 nanometer CPUs would have replaced the Core 2 quad Q9400 that we took a look at in the previous video. Supports maybe a couple more instructions and all that. The RAM runs at 1333 megahertz, 8 gigabytes. Don't know why it keeps saying that. Using Intel integrated graphics. As you guys know, the first generation Core i series processors still used Intel GMA graphics. You wouldn't get the newer Intel HD graphics until second gen Core i series processors. Well, now with introductions out of the way, what we can do is we can do a quick Cinebench run. And I bet you, even though this is 2 cores and 4 threads, this will get a pretty similar score to the Core 2 quad, and even comparing it to the overclocked Core 2 quad. And it's mostly due to the newer architecture. But we're gonna see if it would just boot up. Here we go. 2 cores, 4 threads. Where's the overclocked Core 2 quad? Should be in this list. Just focus. Here's the Core 2 quad. Here it is. Here's the Core 2 quad. We're going to be 864. Let's see if we can beat that score. I'll pause the video once it starts. We're gonna start. There we go. I'll see you once this is done. Well, it's completed, and it looks like I was actually very wrong. It couldn't even beat the Core 2 quad when it was stock at 2.6 gigahertz. That's a 70-80 point difference. 490 versus 560. Couldn't even come close to the overclocked, which is 864. Man. But don't worry. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad CPU for gaming, at least. That just means the multi-core score isn't where it's supposed to be. Now, how can we go and test gaming? Well, the thing is, we're not going to run anything on Intel HD graphics. We won't even try. So what we're going to do, We're going to shut this system down, and before we go and replace the CPU, we're going to actually just add a GPU and see how far we can push that Core i3, how far it can take us in the land of gaming. Is it going to shut down? There we go. So what we're going to be planning to add is a GTX 1070. Now, if we were going to keep the i3 in there, that might have been too much, but we're not going to keep that i3 in there. So let me go and get our GPU. Now then, here's our GeForce GTX 1070, and here's the computer it's going to go in. And immediately, as you can see, we have a problem. We have a major problem on our hands. Now, contrary to what you might think, we can't just stick that in there because this only supplies, what, like 75 watts? And an 8-pin can supply up to 180 watts. So even though it fits, we won't get all the power we need. And even though the GPU would turn on if we did that, as soon as we did some gaming, it would crash every single time. Now, I have one of these, dual 6-pin to an 8-pin. Now, these are perfectly fine, and the reason is because if you have two 6-pins, you have two 75-watt power adapters, and it combines it to a 180-watt power adapter, so that's fine. However, the trouble is we don't even have a second PCIe power connector. So what do we do? Well, if I can just find it, I have a dual Molex to 6-pin. Now, with this little low power CPU and just a single hard drive, I'm pretty confident that this 350-watt PSU can power up all of this. However, there's yet another problem. This is a quote-unquote legacy-free system, so that means no Molex. What do we do? Well, if you had a system like this, then it would be much smarter to go and get a GTX 1060. A 3 GB, 6 GB, doesn't matter which one, but the important thing is that they have a 6-pin power adapter, not an 8-pin power adapter. So if you were going to use this as a main system, if you didn't want to go and replace the power supply, GTX 1060, 6 GB, perfect. Maybe GTX 1660, if you can find a model with a 6-pin power adapter, perfect, absolutely perfect. Even if you had a Core i7 in there, the CPU would still be the bottleneck in most cases. Now, I would use the 1060 if it came in time in this video, but it didn't. So I'm going to be upgrading the PSU to this. Now, if we're being completely honest, 380 watts versus 350 watts, that isn't much of a difference. But the most important thing is that it still has that single PCIe connector, and more importantly, has a mix of SATA and Molex. That's exactly why we're going to use this power supply. So let's get this out of the way and get this out of the way and start unscrewing the power supply. Now, before I go on, there is one thing that is very important with pre-built systems to check, and that is the pinout of this big little connector right here. And the reason is in some generations of computers, HP, Dell, or whatever, they like messing things up and making things proprietary. So you want to go and look up an ATX 24 cable pinout and make sure all of these colors line up with the standard ATX power supply. Now, if you already have a standard ATX power supply, what you can do is get this one and this one and check all the colors and make sure the colors are all the same. You want to make sure you're holding it in the right direction. So that's clip side facing each other. Can't do this with one hand, but you want to make sure that all the colors are in the exact same place. I checked beforehand and they line up, so that means we can keep going with replacing the power supply. Well, now that we have the power supply out, looks like a much cleaner system. Time to go and put this slightly more powerful and more versatile power supply in. Now, we did run into a bit of a snag. As you can see right here, it's behind that little flap, but let's be honest, it doesn't matter. All the screws are in perfectly, and the clip is still holding it in place. So now it's just time to do the wiring. Now that we're all done with the wiring, I want to put in the it's time to put in the GPU, and I want to do this while the camera is recording. So let's turn on the flash, put the camera on the edge of my desk. Let's put in the GPU. Hopefully these SATA cables won't cause much of a problem. Oh wait, forgot a step. Gotta remove this little doodad. Get a good look at the GPU. If you didn't want to go and replace the CPU like we want to do, something like a 1050 Ti would be completely fine. Especially because this thing is less powerful than the Core 2 Quad. Those SATA cables. It's being a hassle. Let's see. Just barely interferes with the RAM. Is it stuck on something? There we go. It's in and the lock locked. Look at that. Just, it actually has a pretty decent amount of room. Can fit 2 thumbs there. It has a pretty decent length, so you might be able to fit a 3070 in here if you really wanted. Maybe if you had like a top 10 i7, but I don't know. This thing doesn't need, even with the top 10 i7, a 3070. Well, now it's time for the cabling. What we can do here is I'll do this on camera too, because I can do this with one hand. This came with the graphics card, by the way. No, actually, it didn't come with the graphics card. Never mind. Is it gonna go in? Yep, there we go. Oh yeah. I'm gonna prevent this side from. We're gonna have to install that thing. Am I being an idiot? Oh, I see. This thing is interfering with it. Well, it looks like we can't put that in. Doesn't matter. This thing's already in. So we can just, if I set the thing right here again, put this in. And if 380 watts doesn't turn out to be enough, I have another power supply we can use. you guys don't really need to listen to this part, but you guys will probably just use a 1060. That's the best thing that's the best choice, even if you have an i7. I'm just doing this because my 1060 isn't here yet, and I have to make do with what I have. Still, things are finicky, but pins aren't lining up. Come on. One of these pins are really over to one side. Alright, come on. Well, now we have the GPU installed. We can see how far we can go with this i3. I'd expect the single core performance to be better than the Core 2 Quad. That's pretty obvious. But we'll see if the lack of 2 extra cores and instead two extra threads will make it have better or worse or the same performance in Counter-Strike. See you once the system is booted up and installed the drivers. Alright, well now that we have the drivers installed, we can go and do some game benchmarks. Let's go start up some Counter-Strike. Alright, well now that we're in game, we can take a look at the settings. We're going to be at 1080p full screen. High everything. Yep, it should all be high. No texture streaming. And we're going to also disable, leave FXAA anti-aliasing disabled. Have these all on their stock things too. And we can go to the benchmark map. Where is it? Workshop maps, and go. Alright, well, we're sitting at 250 to 300 FPS inside the little room that we're at right now. As you can see over to the side right here, CPU 60% using all the threads, but GPU is only at 30%. It's barely working. We'll see how that changes during the benchmark though. And one more thing. To go and change the sensitivity. That's better. Let's go. Let's erase the sound. Pay attention to the FPS up there. It's at 50 FPS right about now. The CPU is still holding us back quite a bit, even though it's not at 100%. You can see the GPU is only at 20%. Holy crap. Even during the smoke test, didn't even go up to 100%. We're gonna see a whole lot of FPS gained from the i7-780 that we're gonna put in here. There we go. That time it reached 100%. All right, well, it's finished. And as we can see, average frame rate, if I go and turn on the focus, 87 FPS. So even though we got a higher multi-core score with the Core 2 quad, the single thread performance on this i3 is obviously much better. We got a higher FPS. Now, that's just the benchmark. Let's go to a deathmatch lobby and see how it is there. Keep in mind that before it was pretty stuttery and around 50 FPS most of the time. So we'll see how it's different now. All right, we're actually in a match now. That sucked. But we are, with the CPU, we're sitting at basically 100%. Let me turn down the sound here. We're basically sitting at 70 to 100%, and we're holding that back the GPU by a shit ton. So, what FPS at least are we getting right now? Well, right now we're getting 70, 80 FPS most of the time with the AK. As you know, if you zoom in with a sniper, it's going to increase your FPS by like 100 or something like that. So, I'm just going to do some gaming for a bit, and you guys can take a look at the graphs over there. And once we actually do an upgrade, you'll see how that changes. So let's bring up the sound here. That sucked. Now this 70, 80 FPS is pretty smooth actually. I could pretty comfortably op here. Now it's not like 100 or 200 FPS, but this is, if you have nothing else, a pretty playable experience. And you don't even need the 1070. If you had an i3, you can just throw a 1050 in here and be perfectly fine. My reaction time was not good. Now this is a 75 Hertz monitor. It's about $100. So that was a lag spike right there. It went down to 50 FPS. So yeah, you will eventually get some of those. But if you're playing competitive, there will never be this many people inside a match. However, there will be smokes. So that might cause some problems if you have a lower end GPU.
It's kind of hard for me to talk louder. I can't hear you down there on the leaderboard with all those credits.
Oh my god, I suck. Let's see if we can do some opping. Oh wow, it's at 40 FPS now. For some reason around middle, it always goes down. But yeah, back to 60 FPS. Alright, we'll play like a minute more of this. Alright, that's enough. Alright, so now what we can do is turn off the computer and put in the i7-870. I'll give you more of an explanation once this thing shuts down. Alright, well, we're back. The i7 has came. As you can tell, it's daytime. It's the next day. Fresh off the eBay market. There's our thermal paste. So, I already took the liberty of taking out the graphics card. And now what we're going to do is take off the cooler and replace the CPU. So just get all these cables out of the way. Now, whenever you take off any type of cooler, it doesn't matter if it's a water cooler or something that's like 8 years old or like 30 years old or like 2 years old, you're always going to want to do it in a cross pattern. Tightening or unscrewing doesn't matter. You want to do it always in a cross pattern to make sure there's always even pressure on the CPU so it doesn't get damaged. It's a lot more important when you're tightening it down rather than unscrewing it, but you know, you want to build up the habit of doing it correctly. So there's only one more to do on this side. Now, props to Dell for actually including a decent cooler. I mean, it doesn't have a copper middle like the Pentium 4 coolers of the previous socket has, but it's better than the really small Intel coolers, so there it is. We're gonna clean off that later. Take the CPU out. There it is. Now, all that's left to do is clean this thing up. Be right back. Alright, well, I cleaned it up. If I can just get my camera to focus, there it is. i3-540, 3 gigahertz, no turbo boost. And just for comparison, let me get the i7. Right here. They're the same size, but the i7 has turbo boost, 4 cores, 8 threads. Much better CPU. Let's go put it in, shall we? So, you literally do the exact opposite of what you did when taking out the CPU for putting it in. Make sure the triangle, which is on this corner, oh sorry, you can't see. Make sure the triangle, which is on this corner, matches the triangular shape on the, well in this case it's a circle thing on the motherboard. But just wiggle it around a tiny bit, make sure it's in there nice and securely. Put that in there. These stupid cables, they're in the way. Now, you guys should go for the 1060. The only reason why there's so many cables here is because I'm using a 1070 because I don't have a 1060, but you guys go for the 1060. If you're going for the 1070, you're, well, really wasting your money because you're losing out on performance that the i7 probably won't give you. Let's be honest, the i7 isn't that new. It's a good budget upgrade if you already have a system like this. Anyway, nice pea-sized amount. The cooler doesn't look like it matters what direction it goes on. Just probably like this, so, you know, don't have a whole bunch of CPU slack if I do it like that, so I want to do it like this. I want to make sure the screw holes line up. There we go. And then slowly tighten down the 4 corners. Don't do it all the way on one side. You want to just tighten down all the sides a little bit. A few turns. Once all of the things are actually screwed down, you can go and actually do it all the way. That's tight. That's tight. That's tight. Now, I'm not exactly sure on this, but if you don't have a GPU, I believe the Intel integrated graphics goes up in its own graphical clock speed as the CPU also gets faster. I'm not sure about that, but I believe the higher end CPU you have, the clock speed of your integrated graphics also goes up. I know it's probably like, I know it's like that on laptops. Don't know about desktops, but let me go and get our GPU. All right. GPU has been acquired. Let's go put this bad boy in there. After plugging in the CPU fan, which I totally forgot to do. Let's see, where's the header? There it is. There we go. Now I can go and plug this in there. Get these cables out of the way. This is a small case. Doesn't matter though. It does have good airflow thanks to this fan. And if you want, you can add a fan at the front. This thing just barely fits. I forgot how I did this. There we go. There we go. That thing's in there now. All we have to... Now, my camera ran out of battery. Sorry about that. We have the graphics card in. Time to go and connect up all the cables. Again, you don't need a new power supply in a dual Molex to 6-pin adapter. I am only using it because I don't have a 1060. But the stock power supply and it's a 6-pin adapter is more than enough. Well, I keep saying 1060, even I mean a 1660. 1660 Super, 1660 Ti, whatever you can find that has a 6-pin adapter, 6-pin power cable on the graphics card. But if you have a spare power supply and a spare 1070 laying around for whatever reason, and you have $35 burning a hole in a pocket, you can do what I did. Other than that, just get the i7 and anything that has a 6-pin power connector, like the 1660, and you'll be fine. There we go, it's in now. Alright, I'm going to connect this up, and we're going to do a Cinebench run and see, and test some games. Some good old games. Alright, well, everything's plugged in. Now let's go to the BIOS to see our new CPU. Let me just pull out my keyboard here. It'll come up on that screen over there. Sorry for the glare, but let's turn it on. Oh, it came up here. You go to the setup. Ah, it ignored me. Oh well. Let's just go to Windows, I guess. As we can see right here, our CPU is detected. 4 cores, 8 threads. And as you can see, it's turboing up to its full turbo boost clock speed every now and then. But that is because Windows started updating. Oh god, and now it wants to update to 20H2. I will see you guys once this is complete. Alright, well, Windows Update is done doing its thing. The disk is at 0, the CPU is at idle, and as you can see here, the CPU is detected and i7-870 too. The memory is running at what it should be. We can just do a quick stress test here. Just really quick, make sure it does it. The temperatures don't shoot up to like 90. Somehow CPU core 4 is like 20 degrees higher than all the other cores. That's probably a bug or something. But as you can see, the actual CPU is at 65 degrees Celsius. It's impossible that only core 4 is at 98 degrees Celsius. That has to be a bug of some kind. If I turn it off, it wasn't core 4. It was the average of all the cores that it was doing. It's probably doing the math wrong. But as you can see, all the cores are at only 70 degrees. The fans only go up a tiny bit. Voltages are still stable at 1.0 volts, as you can see over here. That's pretty surprising. We can stop that. We can just close this. Put that on the other monitor. And let's boot up Cinebench R20. And we can see the new score. Obviously, we're expecting this to go out and like crush even the 3.7 gigahertz overclocked Core 2 quad. So if it just boots up, there we go. Make sure the system is idle. The CPU is idle. The disk is doing something that Windows 10 wants it to do. Will 7% make that much difference? 2%? Yeah, we'll just wait for Windows 10 to finish doing its thing. All right, well, Windows 10 is finished. This system is idle, 1 gigahertz, and we can go and run Cinebench. Now, as you can see over here, the system is turboing up to 3.4 gigahertz. It's going to be an all-core turbo boost, so it's not going to go up to what you see on arc.intel, which is probably like 3.5 or 3.6, because this thing is doing an all-core turbo, and all-core turbos obviously are going to be less than a single-core turbo boost. So this thing's all-core turbo is apparently 3.1 gigahertz. And as you can see, it's actually making pretty good progress for itself. Sorry about the glare. I will pause this and see you once we get our score. All right, well, now we have our score. We ended up scoring a 1030. So as you can see, that is way faster than the Core i3-540, which got literally half of that score. And it's even faster than the 3.7 gigahertz Core 2 Quad Q9400 that scored an 800. So we had, even though we had a little bit less of a clock speed, an all-core clock speed, the Core 2 Quad was 700 megahertz faster. We had double the amount of threads. We had hyper-threading. And also, we had a better IPC, instructions per clock. So even though this thing was going at 3 gigahertz the whole time, we got a much better score, which is good. If we tested single core performance, then the i7 would, with its better IPC, would even be turboing up to like 3.5 or 3.7 gigahertz, and that would really, really crush the Core 2 quad. But surprisingly, it's still not as good as, it's priced the same as the Core i5, 3550 4-core. So it's priced like basically the same as a 3rd generation i5 with a similar clock speed. So that's actually pretty interesting. But now we can go and do some gaming. We can get back into Counter-Strike and see how that will go. All right, well, sitting on the tiny little room here for the FPS benchmark, as you can see, 500 FPS. That is an insane boost. And what's really important, as you can see right here, the CPU, well, Counter-Strike being primarily a 3 to 4 threaded game, although it uses two really heavily. We're using the CPU, we're turboing to only 3.1 gigahertz. However, we have that better IPC. And most importantly, that GTX 1070 is at 50%. If we had the 1050, we would be maxing out that thing. So it's a good thing we upgraded. However, it is important to say we don't need the 1070. The 1060 will be perfectly fine, uses less power, and doesn't require a power supply replacement. And as you can see here, Windows switched what cores the tasks are running on. It likes to do that. But let's go and set the phone down in a way where you can see both graphs. And now what we can do is start the benchmark and see what we will get. So we are getting 200, 300 FPS in the benchmark right now. Before we were getting 60 to 50 FPS, maybe 70 if we were lucky. Still not maxing out the GPU, but that's why we're putting, you guys should use the 1060 or the 1660 instead of a 1070. So we can just put the camera right here. Even going through the smoke, we only went down to 60 FPS, which is pretty insane. If we had a better motherboard, it might we could maybe overclock this thing, but there's no need, really. Look at that, 300 FPS. We'll also be going into deathmatch lobby, so don't worry. So we can get some more real-world performance numbers. We are almost done with the benchmark, and we can see our average FPS. Before it was around an 80, I'm pretty sure. And this time we will get a average FPS of 167. That is insane. But, well, obviously you would be getting around 200 to 300 FPS most of the time. But we will make sure of that once we get in the deathmatch lobby. So I'll see you once we're there. Alright, so right now we are in game. And I put up the other type of FPS counters so you guys can see better. But we're getting 100 and 130 FPS, 100 FPS, pretty much all around, 150 FPS, 160. And as you can see over here, we're getting pretty good, decent CPU utilization. The clock speed is right at its base all-core turbo. And our GPU is actually sitting at 50%, so, So, let me just kill these people over here. It's buttery smooth experience. You can even use a high refresh rate monitor, 120 or 144 hertz monitor. And yep, basically you want to stick with the 1660 Ti or 1060. Anything that has an 8-pin power connector would be too much for this processor to keep up with anyway. But this isn't the only game we're going to test. We're also going to test Minecraft, some Valorant, GTA 5 can pretty much run on anything, let's be honest. It's a really old game. Came out during the FX era, AMD FX era, if I'm not mistaken. That was horrible. But we're just gonna play a little bit more of this, so you guys can get a feel, because you guys can see the graph and the FPS. So just gonna play a little bit more of this for you guys to feel out the system. I mean, again, I'm not the best at CSGO, so. This is 1080p, by the way. Ah, come on. I'm being real twitchy for some reason. Yeah. Haven't used the op in a while. Come on. Of course. Oh, that was... I should have died there. Yeah, it's a pretty smooth experience. Just gonna get one more kill. Alright, let's go. And I think the next game we should test is Valorant. So I'll be right back with Valorant. Alright, well now we're in Valorant. The loading screen, we're getting 270, 260 FPS. It's using pretty much all the cores that we got. And the GPU is working surprisingly hard for only being in the menu. I'm going to show you your graphics settings. 1920 by 1080. We have no max FPS. We have multi-threaded rendering on. Basically everything high. Don't know what this darkens the corner of your screens. No, don't want that. VSync off. Anti-aliasing the max without going with that stupid option. Improve clarity on, no beta experimental crap. Bloom, you know, all of the, it's basically on high. Max settings, 1080p. Let's go find a match. And I'll see you once we actually get in one match. Alright, well now that we're in, you can see that our disk is still working pretty hard actually, but we're getting 100, we're at the max settings and we're getting 160, 150, 170 FPS. and our GPU's working 60%, our CPU's at 50%. This we're not really being held back by, well, we're being held back by the clock speed of the CPU, if I had to guess, but we're running at, you're at 180 for a second there. Oh, you guys can see the FPS counter. We're just gonna play this game and then I'm gonna stop recording, finish it so I don't like screw up anybody's chances of winning. And well, you can see right now that the GPU isn't working hard at all. So this would run pretty much fine even on the 1050. This isn't really a graphically intensive game, more of a CPU intensive game. But yeah, we would be perfectly fine with a 1060 or a 1660. Anything with a 6-pin power connector. So just gonna keep recording for a couple more minutes, and then after that I'm gonna stop the recording, and then we'll get back to you with Minecraft after that. After Minecraft, we're gonna test one more game. We're gonna do Cod Warzone, and that'd be the last game we're gonna test. Cod Warzone would pretty much is the most intensive game that we're going to test today. As you can see, your CPU is working pretty hard. Yeah, there's no need to have anything more powerful than a 1070. We had to go and replace the power supply, and we can't even use its full potential. So stick with the 1060. A used 1060 was pretty cheap on eBay, or you can use a new 1660 or a 1660 Super, or 1660 Ti. You know, the whole shebang. I think there's someone over. Ah, damn it. Yeah, I'm okay at Counter-Strike, but I suck real bad in Valorant. I'm just going to show you a bit more of this. Are we getting 200 FPS? I wonder if... no, it went back down to 150, 170. But if I look at the sky, we can get like 300. 200. Let's try going in this other direction. Alright, well now we're in Minecraft. Let's go over the settings we're going to use. Fabulous. The resolution is, well, it's 1920 by 1080, but it's running in a window. Like, this is how most people run it, so. GUI scale 2, that doesn't matter. Turn off VSync. Frame rate unlimited. Let's turn that up to like 12 chunks. Well, we'll see how it does in 32 chunks. Particles all, well, you get all the things here. It's done, back to game. On 32 chunks, well, the server isn't at 32 chunks. It's at, the server is at, I think, 12 chunks. We're getting 160 FPS. As you can see, Minecraft, I think, is a single-threaded game, so we're actually getting up to 3.3 gigahertz because it's not an all-core turbo boost anymore. The CPU can go higher. GPU, of course, in Minecraft doesn't really get used that much. So if we just go and put some things, put the thing here, it's a really smooth experience. I think I'm recording in 60 FPS, so you can tell. 100 FPS. I mean, it's not that complicated of a place to render, but if we just go over here real quick and set off some TNT so you guys can see how it actually looks like if the CPU would go down to like single digits or whatever. Can you do this? Yep. All right. All right, well, that brought us down only to 60 FPS minimum. As you can see, we're right back up to 150, 120 FPS. Well, as we get over here, it's gonna go down, but as we look over here, you see the FPS goes up a little bit. So this is just a little taste of how Minecraft runs. Alright, now what we can do is get Cod Warzone, which will be the last and most intensive test this computer will have to handle. See you then. Alright, well, now that we have Cod Warzone open, we're waiting for the shaders to go and install. I believe there are 2 or 3 packs that has to go through. CPU is pretty much pinned at the start screen. Let's go change some settings to maybe make this thing use the GPU more instead of the CPU. Let's see here. Graphics. You want to go full screen, not full screen borderless, because that usually gives you a little bit more FPS. Resolution, we're going to stay at 100%. There we go. Aspect ratio, automatic, that's fine. Disable VSync. I guess 300 frames max, doesn't matter. NVIDIA highlights disabled. Reflex. Let's see, additionally, GPU clock speed. This will reduce latency but increase GPU power draw. That's fine. Our GPU is much better than our CPU, so we want to keep things at high. Yep, tessellation. I guess all doesn't really change the on-demand texture streaming. Downloads high-quality textures to your hard disk from internet as you play the game. No. Let's see, streaming quality doesn't really matter. We'll do low. We'll do normal, why not? Shadow map resolution, we'll do extra because we have a good GPU. Cache spots that disabled. Anything that says cache on it, you want to disable it. Particle lighting ultra. Direct ray tracing. This is a GTX 1060, not an RTX, whatever. Ambient occlusion both. Screen space reflections high. We want to keep that at the highest. Depth of field enable. Well, nah, let's disable that because that basically makes it make things that are far out blurry. And everything else is good. No motion blur. Apply settings. Anything that has to do with the GPU, you want to crank that. Unless if you have like a 1660, a 1060, you don't want to go over the VRAM limit. So you want to make sure, for example, if you get the 1060, you get the 6 GB version, not the 3 GB version. But as long as you're within your VRAM limit, you're going to be completely fine and can crank the things up as hard as you want. We have 2.1, so 2 speakers and a 0.1, meaning 1 subwoofer. So we don't have a home theater. We'll do stereo reference. If you have headphones, you want to do stereo reference also. home theaters for like 4.1, 5.1, 7.1 surround sound. Other than that, we're not going to be doing voice chats. That's pretty much it. We're gonna wait. We're gonna actually have to restart the game because it told us to change the, I think it was the frame rate limit or something. But after we restart the game and after it's done installing the texture packs, sorry, not texture packs, the shaders, optimizing the shaders, and once we're in a game, I'll put up the camera again and we can see our performance. All right, well, now that we restarted the game, in the menu we're getting 90 FPS. We're actually pretty close to our RAM limit. So if this is really the only intensive game you're going to play, it's not worth upgrading your RAM. But if you're going to do more, if you have any game that's more intensive than this, you might want to go and upgrade your RAM to 12 gigs, 14 gigs, 16 gigs. We found a match. And as you can see, our hard disk is working pretty hard, but our CPU is perhaps 50%, our GPU is doing nothing. So if we just put the phone down here, don't mind the Windows activation thing. It complains all the time. Getting 300 FPS in this screen, although that doesn't really mean anything. All right, so right now, getting 70 FPS, 60 FPS, 50 FPS, 60. My sensitivity is way too high, I need to go change that. But we're getting 60, 70 FPS. Our CPU is sitting at basically 80%, 90%. Our GPU is hardly working, so don't worry, a 1060 or 1660 won't go and drop the frame rate. Let me see. I have to change the sensitivity. Mouse sensitivity, bring that down to a 5. The plane scene got a little laggy, although that's because of our hard drive. We're still loading things in. Oh yeah. Yeah, these stutters is because we're still loading things in from our hard drive. But we're getting 70 FPS right now. Let's go and jump at the very last minute. And we'll see what our FPS is like while we're dropping to the ground. Oh, let's drop now, I guess. Oh, there are 2 other guys dropping. Yep. This is what happens when you have a hard drive instead of an SSD. Yeah, stutters. These are really bad. You might want to, if you have a hard drive, you might want to sit somewhere. Where's my F key? There it is. Yeah, our hard drive is working all the time, but when our hard drive is not loading stuff in, we're getting 60 FPS, 70 FPS. And our GPU is barely doing anything, actually, because our CPU is obviously the bottleneck. However, it's pretty smooth. Like, once the hard drive is gonna finish loading everything, our experience is pretty smooth, I gotta say. Mouse is pretty My sensitivity's pretty messed up, to be honest with you. Yeah, it's not the best thing to go out in the open while you're stuttering all over the place because of your hard drive. This game really does need an SSD. But the fact that it can run it really well obviously means that we've done a good job with our upgrades. Someone's already been here. Someone died there? I think there might be someone there. Camera ran out of space. Sorry about that, if there was a weird cut there. I gotta sit somewhere and really let my hard drive load in everything. You can't keep moving around. It's slowly loading in everything. I mean, my hard drive... Oh, that's a decoy grenade, I think. Yeah, this is a really bad experience if you got a hard drive. Let's see what our hard drive is doing. Yep, it's really working on getting things loaded. You really want to put this game on an SSD. Unfortunately, I don't have an SSD to test with. Yep, I got killed. I'm not gonna subject you guys and myself to this very poor performance because of a stupid hard drive. But if you guys had an SSD, and or if you sit at the loading screen and waited until the hard drive actually loaded and everything, you would have basically a 60-70 FPS experience all the way through, no dips. Let's just end the process here because I'm not going to wait for this thing to go and try to exit. But I think that will do it for this video. You can just take another look at the system here. Again, we upgraded from a Core i3 dual core to a Core i7, the very first generation i7. We have our GPU that it's a stupid choice, but I didn't have a 1060 and I also didn't have a SSD in time for this video. But as a recap, if you guys have a system similar to this, $35 for the i7. You do not need to replace the power supply like I did, and you want to go for a used 1060, or if you really want to buy new, 1660, 1660 Super, 1660 Ti, or if you're going to only play esports titles, like a 1650 Super or something like that, or a 1050 Ti. Really, your maximum at this point in the market, in the graphics card market, anything that has a 6-pin power connector is going to be like way more than enough for non-RTX gaming, especially like even at 1440p. Like a 1060 would be able to run, for this computer would be able to run with a 1060 1440p Counter-Strike pretty easily, and actually move less strain off of the CPU and put it on your GPU, which is what you want to do. But I think this will do it for this video. Cod Warzone really does put pressure on your storage devices. And, yep, I will see you guys later.